Good evening, everyone. So this is also going to be recorded. So just in case you would like to rewatch, you can rewatch it on the Thai YouTube channel, and we will try and get as many questions of yours answered.
So good evening, everybody. Look forward to. I'm really looking forward to an engaging session today around stock option plans. There are several things we need to think about when you put together a stock option plan. Stock option plans will stock option plans tend to be thought. You need to think through your stock option plans at different levels. What do you do when your company is just starting up? What do you do at when you're doing angel financing, when you do a seed round, when you do Series A? What do you do when you're a late stage company? The issues are different. Traditionally, of course, stock option plans have been thought of in a one size fits all kind of in a mind frame. But as stock options become more and more valuable, and as stock options become key wealth creation tools for a lot of young people who are coming to the workforce, one will need to think a little more deeply about them, and we have started to see elements of that deeper thinking come into play in the way companies think about ESOP nowadays. When you think of an ESOP, when you just form a company, very early team that is coming in, your first 2-3 hires, at that stage, typically you commit certain options to people, but you actually don't make a plan. That actually is a smart thing to do. Just when you start up, you really don't want to spend time thinking about what your ESOP plan should look like, how it should be structured, because you will end up doing it out of reading a few things here and there, and without really having an understanding of what your business needs. And you won't have an understanding simply because your business is still not reached a point when the issues start cropping up. So you tend to be more bookish at that moment. So the best thing to do is just inform people formally. It need not be informal casual conversation, but a formal communication saying that they will get whatever ESOP that you want to commit to them. The only thing you need to be clear about is that oftentimes what we see is a simple letter going saying that you'll be issued 2% of the company, 1% of the company, 0.5% of the company, whatever that number is. But employees go away with the feeling that that 2% will remain 2% even if the company reaches Series F stage. So you need to clarify to them that the 2% is what it is today, and it will be diluting as more and more equity comes into the company. The better way to do it is to say that the company today has X number of shares. You are getting ESOP worth you are being given ESOP of Y number of shares, and that translates to Z percentage. So what people anchor themselves to then is the number of shares and not the percentage. And you should also specifically clarify that that percentage will dilute. Everybody understands that. But when you don't tell them, later they get ideas. So phase one, when you're just doing something, make it clear that the plan will be put in place soon. When the plan is put in place, so the grant is so much, and it will be diluting as and when the company raises money. Now, this will work well for senior employees whom you don't consider part of the founding team. Whoever is part of the founding team, they may or may not be comfortable with just ESOPs, because ESOP plan may take 1 year, 1.5 years to be put together, and legally there's a 1-year cliff. So you could have a situation where somebody's worked for 2 years, but they don't get any ESOPs at all because the plan was put in place late and legally nothing has vested in them. So while that is okay for some people at the employee level, people at the founding team level may or may not be comfortable with that. So as far as founding team is concerned, when you get people in before you even raise your first check, or immediately after your first check of, let's say, 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs, whatever that is, you need to find a way to give them the shares even before the plan is put in place. That any good lawyer or any good chartered accountant or company secretary can find a way to give you an instrument that will give them shares with a vesting structure in place. And we're recommending that only because this is the founding team, and you bring in a founding team, to stay with you for the long haul. It's really your first 5-10 employees who define the company, right? From a long-term perspective. They are the team which stays with you, stays long with you, puts in the hours and the effort with you. So find a way to, reward them early so that they are comfortable. ESOP plans are typically drawn up and put in place once you have an institutional financing round. Some companies, of course, do it even after a big angel round, raise a couple of crores, and you put in place an ESOP plan. But most commonly, what we have seen is ESOP plans are put in place after a seed round is done. Because one, the seed round establishes the valuation, which you can use when you're making the grants. When valuation is not established, whatever you give will look like a very low percentage, right? Very low in value. So if you've raised 50 lakhs and you've diluted 10% of the company, or value the company at 5 crores, you give 5 lakhs worth of options to somebody, that's 1%. In your mind, it's 1%. In their mind, it's 5 lakhs. I know it's 5 lakhs worth of options. So that sort of creates a unnecessary expectation mismatch. Really, the value lies in these options when the company becomes whatever, right? Series C, Series D, even Series B for that matter. It's not the right time to measure the value when the small checks are given. At least once you have done a seed round, some valuation is established, whether it's 7 million post, 10 million post, whatever. At least that can be a basis for granting options. So what we see most commonly is ESOP plans being put in place after a seed financing round is done. Now, at that, when you look at an ESOP plan, there are 3 or 4 important elements. One is, what is the size of the pool? The size of the pool is almost, nobody thinks about it too much. When you're doing a seed round, it's 15%. It's 12 to 15% is standard. Once you get to Series B stage, about 8-10%. And by the time you get to Series C, D, E, even a 2-3% pool is usually enough. What we're talking about is unallocated here. Whatever is already allocated is not considered part of the pool because it's not available for making grants. So first question is, what is the size of the pool? At seed stage, typically 12 to 15%. The next question is, the detail as far as the plan is concerned. 3-4 elements there. One is, what is the strike price? What is the vesting formula? Do you permit exercise of options or not? These are the key questions really that you want to consider. Strike price in India, because it's an option plan, you have to at least collect the par value of the shares. It cannot be below the par value. By law, the minimum amount to be paid is the par value of the share. What we've seen and what makes sense is that at the early stages, you make all grants at par. Don't worry about valuation. Even if the value of the company, let's say I'm just taking numbers, for example, there's a 10 million valuation you have. 10% of the pool is $1 million. That's 7.5 crores. If you give somebody 0.1%, it's literally 75 lakhs worth of options. At this stage, you're not giving options based on a strike price. So you just issued at par value. Valuation at that stage, as we all know, is just not really. It is not a meaningless number, but it is not a number that one looks at and takes very, very seriously. Those numbers become sensible only when the company is ready for an M&A or is what you consider a growth company. So till then, most grants are done at par value. You don't do an exercise price, which is a discount to the fair value. Once the company reaches Series C, Series D stage, it's $1 billion company or even a $500 million company. If you make a grant worth 0.1%, that's a significant amount of money that is being left on the table. So at that stage, companies start to think about whether the strike price should be par or discount to fair value. Some everybody gets grant, two kinds of. Very often, people get two kinds of grants. One is a grant which is par value. One which is a discount to fair value. So you see those models at a later stage. At an early stage, you simply go with the par value of the options. The second question that you need to consider is, what is the vesting model? The most common vesting model, as all of you know, is a simple 4-year straight line vest with a 1-year cliff. Post 1 year, vesting could be daily, quarterly, monthly, weekly, whatever. We don't believe you should do things like daily vesting or a weekly vesting. It just creates unnecessary amount of complication, because you will end up having people with 0.2 shares vested, 0.4 shares vested. It legally means nothing. So simply monthly or quarterly vesting is the right way to go, with the 1 year cliff. The other thing which we think is a good thing to think about is to figure out whether you want to make options vest on an event basis. The one extreme is time-based vesting. The other extreme is performance-linked vesting, where options are granted based on the performance of a given individual. Now, performance-based vesting is very difficult to manage and track, whereas event-based vesting is actually a good model for the companies to think about in the context of at least senior employees, founding team, key, vice president level people. By event-based vesting, what I mean is when the company achieves a milestone, a certain number of options vest for all those members of the senior team. The milestone could be X amount of ARR. It could be Y valuation. It could be completing a Series C round. It could be anything which it should fundamentally be what the company is working towards and what the company is tracking. It could simply, for a SaaS company, it could be getting 100 paying customers. I'm just taking a random number there again. The idea is you want the senior management of the company to work towards that goal. And when that goal is achieved, everybody who's part of the senior management at that point of time will have their options vested. So we believe that event-based vesting is something that companies should consider. And it need not again be that every option that a senior management employee gets is event-based. There could be a combination of time-based vesting and event-based vesting. So employee A could get 100 options for time-based vesting and 200 options for event-based vesting, for instance. This also ensures that the team is pulling its weight together. The entire team is working towards that goal. With time-based vesting, those options vest irrespective of whether the goals are achieved or not. So an event-based vesting ensures that the entire team is looking in the same direction, and the team members tend to help each other pull their weight in a situation like this. So we believe that event-based vesting is something that will become more and more common in the years to come, but it needs to be thought through very carefully. The one thing you need to be conscious about is when you change goals. Let's say you've granted X number of options on the basis that company achieving Y ARR is the milestone event, which will result in vesting of those options. But company suddenly decides that it's not ARR anymore that we track; it's profitability that we track. There's a lot of unnecessary mismatch of expectations with the team. At that stage, what would be good is actually recasting the vesting structure for those options so that company goals get again aligned to the grants. So you could have granted a certain number of options based on event-based vesting of ARR achievement, and then you change the goalpost of the company. You change the goalpost even for the vesting of the options. That way, the team is pulling in the same direction as you want. The third big issue, that's about event-based vesting. We don't see performance-based vesting too much because it's just way too complicated to manage, and there's not enough time or bandwidth or mind space to manage something like that today, unless you use some really good tech tools to manage performance-based vesting. And in general, performance-based vesting is not very popular around the world. The third issue, which is important to consider, is whether you will allow employees to exercise options at their will. Globally, the model, at least in the US, is to allow employees to exercise options as and when they want, so long as the options have vested. Now, in India, in general, because of complexity with the way company law functions, complexity which is arising out of the way courts function, risk of litigation, companies don't often allow employees to exercise their options. Now, the side effect of that is you can't tell an employee that if he leaves. Typically in what we call free exercise plans, when an employee leaves, he's supposed to exercise the options within a defined time frame. That could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. or 6 months. When options are not exercised, these options lapse. Now, if you're not allowing employees to exercise options, you can't cause them to lapse. It's very unfair to the employee that if he leaves the company, he's literally losing the options. So some complex structure, some not complex, but cumbersome processes will need to be followed using using some trust structures. But it is possible to find a balance where employees are allowed to exercise, but you don't have the risk of all the attendant issues that come with exercise of options. So think very carefully whether you want to allow exercise or not. If you're not allowing for exercise of options, if you don't allow for exercise of options, you will have to permit a long exercise period, even if employees leave the company. If you allow exercise, there is a risk of some complications arising due to company law, litigation, etc. So be very conscious when you make the decision to allow employees to exercise, or go with the third route, which is allowing employees to exercise shares through trust structures. The trust is controlled by the founders or the management. Employees get the benefit of exercise, which means one of the important levers, which is employee being forced to exercise the option, continues to be available. Employees are not going to simply leave because they get better opportunity somewhere else, simply because they lose the benefit of the options they have here if they don't exercise them, and exercise results in a significant tax payout for the employees. So think about the right balance there. There is no one size fits all here. There is no one size fits all in the sense of company A versus company B. It could also be different for different categories of employees. What you do for senior management is not necessarily what you do for junior level employees. So think through these elements before you finalize your ESOP plan. And once you finalize it, these are fairly simple to implement. Like I said, the trust structures are a little cumbersome, but they're not complicated. These can be managed with good advisors fairly easily. And like I said, more often than not, you start adopting ESOP plans only when you reach a seed stage in financing. And therefore, there is money available, there is a team available to manage these things. Not advisable to simply take the easiest route, because the options are the single most important tool available to attract and retain talent today. And it's worth spending the right amount of time to get the right balance there. Very often we find founders not thinking through a lot of detail, simply because experience or history has shown a model work. But time has come for you to change on all these things. So these are the three broad elements, four issues really. One is what is the size of the pool, two is strike price, three is vesting structures, fourth is whether you allow exercise or not. Other stuff like liquidity programs, buybacks, those are not things you need to think about when you create the plan. When the buyback is possible, it is, and at that time you can think through what you need to do. You don't have to worry about it when you create the plan. There'll be boilerplate clauses which cover for those things. But these are the 3-4 key elements that you need to think about at an early stage of the company's life. Early stage meaning when you put the plan together, which is around the seed round or the Series A round. Broadly, this is what I wanted to talk through. Happy to take questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Srini. So, folks, if you have any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask Srini the question directly. So we have a
quick question. Hello, this is Vinod.
Yes, Vinod.
Yeah. So instead of performance-based options to the founders, what do you think of effort-based options? For the year, like typically a year later or year after in the business together. Besides the original sweat equity or whatever.
So can you explain that a little more? What would you mean by effort-based options?
Effort-based, it means, you talked about, right? In a year, give some performance-based to employees as well as to the owners. Effort-based in the sense, hey, I'm working, full-time, 160, 180 odd hours a month for the 12 months period. Now, the other founder may not be maybe 3 months he had some medical issues and things like that, and he was only contributing maybe half or a quarter or something. So some differentiation among the founders based on the effort, typically the first year or so, or second year.
So this is actually a very, very good and important issue that people don't think too much about. When you start the company, you just make allocation amongst the founders based on some rule of thumb, what one thinks is fair. But very often you find that one founder is not contributing as much as the other. One founder is not as hardworking. One founder doesn't have the capability, and that founder wants to leave 2-3 years down the line, and the stock that founder owns is literally free stock without having put in any effort. So nobody has found a good solution for this around the world. The only one that has been put in place is reverse vesting for founders, which funds insist upon when they write their first checks, simply because of their experience. What we find is there's a lot of resistance to founder vesting because the founders look at it as a founder versus investor issue. It's not really a founder versus investor issue. It's really an issue of what is fair to the entire cap table. Now, if there are 4 founders and one of them is not working out, the other 3 founders are also losing the benefit of those shares. And you have to find another person to do this founder's work, and you issue a lot of options to them. So it is, I think it is important to think about this. Unfortunately, the only place you see it play out is really when the investors come in. As far as the point you made, which is effort-based vesting, it is very difficult to, unless the founders have significant trust in each other. A founder will say, I may have worked 100 hours, you may have worked 150 hours, but I have delivered a lot more than you have. My work has been more effective than yours. So my 100 hours is equal to 200 hours of yours. So I should get more options. So essentially what happens is it leads to a lot of arguments amongst the founders, and it's hard to say who has contributed what. So one thing that can, one thing you would potentially consider is, create a pool of, let's say, 50% of the shares that the founders are getting for themselves. And, that the 50% is allocated upfront and each founder gets it. The other 50% is sitting in a pool to be allocated to the founders, and, figure out a mechanism at a later point of time. It's so much harder if there are 2 founders, little easier if there are 3 or 4 founders and one of them want to leave. But even if there are 2 founders, 1 year, 18 months down the line, one of the founders stays and the other founder leaves. So whoever leaves doesn't get those options. And if both founders are continuing, have another conversation at that stage. But don't put any, I would say don't put anything like you put more effort, I put more effort, because that's always going to be arguable and disputable. Just leave it in there that, both of you need to figure it out. But again, even that there's no guarantee that works fairly, because, a founder with little more leverage will end up winning the battle on those options. So unfortunately, I can't think of anything that will solve for a problem like this. No matter what you do, it could work unfairly to somebody. But the simplest mechanism, in our view, is just to create a pool of the founder shares to be figured out at a later point of time. Don't put any, mechanism around it, because any mechanism can be complex and, unfair.
So this is not an ESOP pool. This is like a separate pool you create for founders only.
Correct. So let's say you have 1 lakh shares today. You just create another pool of 1 lakh more shares. So 50% is pre-vested for every founder. 50% is sitting in the pool to be determined later.
Yeah, we have another question from Sabarish. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Good evening. Interesting session. I'm Chartered Member of Thai Mysuru. I have a couple of questions. One question arising from the previous question. Now, to choose between a sweat equity and ESOP, which one would you recommend? That is question number 1. The second question is, when ESOP is issued at par at some stage in the startup's life journey, and there is a valuation which is higher than the par value, how does the perquisite get attracted, and who has to bear the TDS portion of perquisite value?
So sweat equity versus ESOP, sweat equity is not usually preferred because, on the sweat equity, tax has to be paid immediately upon those conditions being satisfied. One advantage of ESOP is actually you can postpone the entire exercise of the options, and you pay tax only when you have visibility that there is significant value. The downside, of course, of that is, the value is very high by the time you exercise the options. Market practice on the both the perquisite and the TDS is that the employee bears it. Company doesn't bear it. That's not the market practice at all.
Yes. So we have Janardhan. Would you like to ask a question?
Srinivas, good evening. We are working in a startup from last 2 years. Now it's got from ideation stage to market stage. Now we are at TRL 7. Company founding team and management offering 2 options. One is ESOPs and another one is sweat equity. Which is the best one to take it as a younger man, as a 28 years old? Which is the best option to?
Hey, sorry, I was trying to cut a call that I was getting. Can you say that question again? I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Our management team offering 2 options. One is sweat equity and another one is ESOPs. I am very much confused with these 2 options, which is the good future for me as a 28 years old boy.
What is the value of the company today?
Company, more than 10 crores, 10 to 10.5 like that.
See, if you take it as sweat equity, let's say you're getting 1% of the company, that's about 10 lakhs. And you'll end up paying tax on the 10 lakhs today itself. If you're very confident about the company's growth and future, I would say take it and pay the tax, because tomorrow when your shares get sold for, let's say, 1 crore or 2 crores, bulk of the gain, anything over 10 lakhs will be capital gain for you, which is long-term capital gain, which is much lower than perquisite tax. Plus on capital gain, if you buy a house or something like that, you can actually escape the tax liability altogether, because buying a home, if you don't have another one, is something that allows you to set off the liability. If you're not super confident, then may not be worthwhile exercising the options or taking the sweat and ending up paying 3.5-4 lakhs on tax.
Okay. Fine. Got it, sir. Thank you.
See, again, this is, whichever decision you take can come back and hurt you 2-3 years later. If you don't exercise and the company does very well, you lose a lot of money later. You exercise or you take it as sweat today, and the company goes down, you would have ended up paying tax today. So, since it depends on whether the company does well or not, it's hard to, make a call on this. But again, one thing, if the management, if the founders are willing to give the shares today, you can consider just doing a simple rights issue of equity shares. Then your tax rate and calculations will be based on the book value and not the fair value. So that is something you can talk to your management about, and just, that will be significantly lower than even the 3.5 lakh number I'm talking about, because the book value is always going to be lower, way lower than the market value.
Okay. Fine, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, so those of you who are looking to download the white paper, we will, mail it to you. And also on the RuleZero website, we'll share a link here where you can also check out the white paper. Yeah, Pradeep, can go ahead with your question.
Yeah. So regarding this event-based, ESOPs that you were talking about, which basically is not that much relevant, like that much upcoming, but it has a potential. How difficult or easy to basically form? I'm talking about very much on the legal side of forming the document and the contract and all that. So if
it's not complicated at all. It's not at all
Okay.
complicated. See, typically what you have is an ESOP plan. The plan is going to be identical whether you offer options based on time-based vesting or event-based vesting. Next, you have the grant letter. The grant letter, in the case of time-based vesting, will say you are granted X options, vesting at Y schedule. In the case of event-based vesting, you'd simply say it's X options, which will vest against the company achieving this milestone. Of course, that 1 year cliff requirement will be there, but let's say your condition is company achieving 100 million ARR. The day the company achieves 100 million ARR, those options vest. So it will just be 1 or 2 lines in the grant letter.
Okay, so we are much on an earlier stage. So we are actually thinking about actually the product launch as itself as an event to start with.
Absolutely, it is exactly what the company is striving to achieve. It could be MVP, it could be first 5 paying customers, it could be product being launched successfully and completing all testing. But basically you need to have a clear, measurable outcome. It shouldn't, I would not recommend saying product being launched, because even a product which is very unsatisfactory and defective, somebody could argue that it's been launched. So just make sure that it is not something that can come back to hurt you. So I would say, what is the proof of a good product being launched? The customers using it, right? So you could simply say 10 customers using it for a 3-month period continuously. It need not be like 3 years of use or something like that.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
That way you're establishing that the product is stable. Once the product is stable, that milestone is achieved. You don't want the team to push towards a launch in a shoddy way, right? See, the key is in event-based vesting, not giving the wrong incentives or creating perverse incentives. So thinking through that is the most important element.
Thank you.
Sir, one more question I have, please.
Let's go on.
Yeah. Sir, suppose management said, what is the performance-based vesting is mandatory, then how can we say no as an employee? It's very...
See, ultimately, it's at the discretion of the management to decide what vesting models to follow. Okay. As an employee, to be honest, your only leverage is if it's not okay with you, you will say that you don't want to remain in employment.
Okay.
It's no different from negotiating your salary or your bonus.
Okay.
Or your incentive. Your leverage is to stay or leave. It's the management's priority to determine what they offer. And as an employee, you decide whether you want to accept it and stay on or leave.
Okay. Got it, sir. Thank you.
Any more questions? Anyone has some? What we'll do is we will email you the ESOPs. Also, we also shared the link on the RuleZero website. You can download the white paper there with your contact details. And this discussion is also available on TiE Bangalore's YouTube channel. So feel free to revisit and have a listen to it again. So I noticed a lot of employees do have questions, but for a founder, Srini, how do you think, you said after the seed round, they should think about it, or should they start thinking about it when they work on their idea, their business plan?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend thinking about it at the idea stage. It's too much to think about. There are lots of elements. Only when you start hiring people, you really know what kind of team you're going to get. And only after when you start executing, it's one thing when you think about your business plan, you have an estimate of the kind of team you need, etc., etc. But it's only a few months or a few quarters into that you really have a sense of what really is happening, right? So whatever you've thought at the business plan stage is always going to be, first of all, you won't have the mind space at that stage. Second, you may not have all the facts necessary to make a decision. If you're a second or a third time entrepreneur, it's very, very different because you've been through this whole journey, you understand the issues. But if you're a first time entrepreneur, I would say postpone it till even the thinking about it. at least till you raise your first, significant angel check, 1.5, 2 crores, 2.5 crores. That's the stage in which you really start pulling a lot of people into the team, right? And that is the stage I think you should think about it. Of course, it's different for what you call the founding team. The guys you expect will be there with you for the long haul. With the founding team, you should think about it. But with the employees who are not part of the founding team, may not be worth thinking too much about it at that stage.
And when you come across, so there have been things shared around. So we have Radhika raising a hand. So Radhika, just you could ask your question and then I'll ask as well.
Yes, thank you so much. So, sir, just a question that sometimes there are founders who come and they're just starting off the company. And in the beginning itself, they say that, we want to keep aside a certain portion of the shares for ESOPs. And this is right at the beginning. They are just bootstrapped or they're just starting off. So at that time, what should one tell them that as of, like what you're saying, that as of now, don't keep it on the side, but look at it in the future? Or
no, you can create the pool. I think it's wise to create the pool upfront. See, okay. In our company, RuleZero, where when we started the company, we had two of us co-founders and somebody who incubated the enterprise. So we allocated the equity between the incubator and two of us, the co-founders, plus ESOP. The pool was there. The pool was created right upfront. But allocation is what I'm talking about.
Understood. And so what would be the pool that you would say when they're starting off? Like I understand you said seed round is 12 to 15%. But when they're just starting off, what would be the advice generally for them to keep on the side?
Anything from 10 to 15% at that stage is fine. Okay. When you get to the seed stage, you can top it up if required.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. That was really helpful. Thanks.
See, again, that pool also helps, solve for issues that get created. If one founder wants to leave, you at least have a reasonable pool to replace that founder with. Because, when a founder leaves, no matter what, he or she will walk away with a certain number of shares.
Thank you.
The question I had was quite a few people have this. Could you throw some light on what happens to ESOPs in the event of a merger or an acquisition?
So, whatever is unvested will just get cancelled out. So let's say you have a cap table which has 100 shares, 90 of them actually issued, 10 of them ESOP, and 5 are granted, 5 are not granted. Those 5 just disappear and 95 becomes the pool size, which means somebody who held 9 shares earlier was holding 9 by 100, which is 9%. But now it becomes 9 by 95. So that person's shareholding goes up proportionately to the extent the options were not granted at all. Everybody gets the benefit of that, whether it's investors, founders, etc. Some companies put in a provision that in an M&A event, whatever is unallocated goes back to the founders, because it's the founders who have contributed to creating that pool. Some investors accept it, some investors don't, but that's something definitely worth thinking about and talking to your investors about. What investors are uncomfortable with is they don't want the founders to be careful or stingy, so to speak, in making grants. So they want the founders to think those shares don't belong to them. So there is merit on both sides. What the founders is saying is logical, what the investor is saying is logical, but definitely worth thinking about. As far as the options granted are concerned, whatever is vested gets cashed out typically when the M&A event happens. Whatever is unvested, you can, plans are usually silent in India, but globally there is some thinking through which happens in the plan. It's very often plans say provide for a double trigger, which typically means that if the employee is asked to leave without cause within a defined time frame after the acquisition, let's say that's 3 months, 6 months, whatever, certain number of options vest, even though as per the vesting schedule, it's going to take more time. So there's some M&A triggers. Some companies just, cash out all options that have been granted, whether vested or unvested. That becomes more a decision the company makes at the time the M&A is done. But the double trigger, if it's offered to any employee, is usually documented in the grant letter itself. Senior employees tend to negotiate these kind of trigger provisions. The not so senior employees usually go with whatever is standard in the plan.
Sure, I think makes a lot of sense. Whatever is unvested will get cancelled off, but there is a provision to negotiate what to do with the unvested shares.
No, whatever is vested, whatever is unvested, you think about it at that stage. In some situations, it's fair to just, treat all of them as vested and, allow the, employee to cash them out. What buyers say is, if you don't allow those options to vest, employees will start leaving. Therefore, they don't want those options to get cancelled. The seller's point to that is, if you want to retain employees, you have to reward them. We shouldn't be paying the price for it. So these things get negotiated to a large extent when the M&A is happening. But broadly, vested, of course, will get cashed out. Unvested is little open with a double trigger provision for senior employees.
Srinivas, one of the things that we are trying to do is we are giving a provision for novation as well in the letters that we are giving to our employees, saying that whoever takes over from us or acquires us, they will continue to honor these commitments in some sense. So would that create any sort of legal issues or?
Not really. So long as you're the only thing you want to think about is, provide what you see. Let's say you have a 10% pool, you have allocated it to 100 employees. When the buyer buys the company, he does not want to deal with so many shareholders. So if those options get exercised and the employee comes onto the cap table, it becomes the buyer's issue to deal with. So the only thing you want to think about is how do you extinguish those options, and that should not be left at the mercy of the employee. Sometimes an employee has left badly, so he's not aligned with cooperating with the company. Sometimes you're not able to track down employees because they've shifted jobs, they've moved cities, they've gone away to a different country, they've not left a forwarding address and stuff like that. So the only thing you want to think about is making sure that those options can be extinguished. You can always find a way to pay the amount to the employee. That should not even be up for discussion. You have to make good the commitments you made, but you don't want those shares just hanging somewhere there.
Understandable.
In fact, what we found interesting was also the expansion in the coverage of stock options beyond the employees to offer them to external consultants and vendors. Have you seen a lot of startups pursue that? See, globally, it's a very common practice to give options to advisors, especially senior advisors. You typically don't have the cash to pay good advisors, right? So the only way you can reward them is with options. Unfortunately, Indian law does not allow you to grant options to people who are not employees or directors of the company or its holding or subsidiary companies. So with advisors, what is common in India is you adopt what is called a phantom plan or a stock appreciation rights plan, where the advisor gets the benefit of the grant in the form of a cash upside. They can never become shareholders. They can only get the cash upside. There are 2-3 downsides to it. One is it becomes a cash liability which the balance sheet has to carry. Second thing is, post a listing also, these guys can't become grantee. They can't hold the shares. So one mechanism which people have used is, you allot phantoms and then you extinguish the phantom by paying the cash, which the employee in turn the advisor in turn uses to buy shares back in the company. So that way you get the best of both worlds. But initially you just start with appreciation rights, and if it's a very early stage, you can just issue the shares at book value, like we were discussing earlier in the context of one of the questions. Very senior advisors are difficult to get, and if you get somebody who you think is super valuable for you, worthwhile thinking about alternate ways of making sure they become shareholders. That makes sense. Yeah. And I see Radhika also has a message. And Akshita, would you like to ask a question? Oh.
Yeah, hi. I think the question is it mandatory to give every employee these options at once. Because we're in a position where I think our founding employees are at different trust levels. There are few that we're very sure of. There are few that are very young right now. And it might be better if we had at least a few more months or a year to just see what we feel. But we're in a situation now where we are creating our pool.
Absolutely. You can keep making grants. Typically, no company makes all the grants at the same time. You keep making grants, as and when it's convenient for you. If you don't use a tool, a technology tool, you'll end up doing it at defined intervals because it's a little bit of work to issue options. If you're using a good tech tool, you can issue options every single day. So, you issue them based on what is convenient for you and what makes sense for your business. There is no need at all to issue all of them at the same time. And nobody does it that way also.
Okay, thank you.
For those of you, Akshita was the winner of the Thai Women program from last year. We are having our next batch that is beginning. If you want to register for it, I've just shared the link in the chat. Yeah. So Radhika, you had one more share, right? You've seen ESOP policies where they put a clause that if an employee joins a competitor, then they cannot exercise the options even if they're vested. Is that legal, Srini?
It's certainly not illegal, though it's not common. It's definitely not illegal. You'll have to define competitor carefully so that it's not up to chance. But what happens, have you thought about what happens to those options? Do those options lapse, or do they become, you just cash them out? Have you thought about that?
Yeah. So I've just read these policies, but yeah, what they basically said is that they will lapse if the employee was to join a competitor.
It's definitely not illegal.
Okay, got it.
Just that it's not very common, that's all.
Understood.
Though there is, we can't argue against the merit of a provision like that. Ultimately you cannot prevent an employee from joining competition, but this becomes a good, way of ensuring that they don't join competition.
Dhanush, would you like to ask your question? I think he's having some issue with his mic. You can even type in your question if you'd like to. So we will be having funding clinics every month with our partners at RuleZero and other partners. So feel free to let us know what kind of topics you'd like addressed, and we will put it across to them. In the next financial year, we would like to continue and sustain the engagement. So since some of you haven't been able to download the white paper, you can go to the website and add in the details and download it. We will also email them to you. Also, the entire session, the video will be available on the Thai Bangalore YouTube channel. So great. I think Srini, do you have any final thoughts? We have.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, sorry, Srini, if it's okay for a last question.
Go on.
Yeah, so Srini, one of the employees has come back and said that in case of any exigency, saying that either because of death of an employee or because of an accident, he becomes unemployable and things like that, he wants the shares to be vested because he wants to ensure that it's like an insurance policy for his firm. Unfortunately, we have not had any such prior experience, but is it possible to do something like that?
So the law in India is that, a company that explicitly provides that when there is death, all options will vest. And if there's permanent disability, all options will vest. The law is very specific about it. It's not really a matter of choice.
So you're saying that by default in the Indian law that is there.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
we can argue, about the fairness or rightness, because, it's like literally saying somebody's salary is prepaid, in the case of death or disability. But, whether it's right or wrong is a secondary question. The law just explicitly covers it.
Awesome. Thank you.
We have a question from Ashok. So Ashok wants to know, how do you liquidate ESOP grants when it's not listed? Any other options to liquidate it?
So liquidity is completely at the discretion of the company. As you've seen last year, there've been massive buyback programs by many startups. So while the answer is straightforward, it is only at the discretion of the company. Just that companies are adopting liquidity programs very often nowadays.
Right. I think it's at the discretion of the company.
Yes, it's completely at the discretion of the company. We believe that, at least at RuleZero, we believe that that is, will change fairly quickly. But today, at least, it's at the discretion of the company.
No, I think what we'll also do is we'll make a list of all these Q&As and share it with the attendees as well, so they can. Any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, this is Ashok here. One question is, we keep hearing there are channels where you can trade this shares, which is still in the secondary market. Is there any registered platforms or licensed agencies like that?
So, if it's a private company, which is the case with almost everybody here, those platforms are of not much use, because the company is a gatekeeper for those, first of all, options can't be traded. The law doesn't permit you to sell an option. You can only sell a share. If you have been allowed to exercise the share, then you can sell it after following whatever process is there in the articles of the company. If you have not been allowed to exercise the options, you cannot trade them at all. There are quite a few platforms today, but all of them, will be able to support only if the company company is facilitating that support. And typically companies facilitate it only at a pre-IPO stage, because they don't care about how many shareholders they have. Whereas, before the pre-IPO stage, companies generally don't support it. So effectively, even if you're an agency, it's not of much use unless your employer allows you to exercise and trade your shares.
Thank you.
Hello. So this is regarding the options actually. So this is regarding a company in the US where the owner has got all the shares. So how many options it can be translated to? For example, if the owner has got around 10 million shares of an unlisted company in the US, so how many options you can translate this to? And what mechanism
is? In the US, there is absolutely no restriction on the size of the pool you can create. You'll even find companies with a 20% pool, 20% pool. You find very large pools in the US, especially for companies with a long gestation period, before value gets created.
So you're saying that even if the company is actually still has got time to create value, the options can be created before that.
Yeah. So there is absolutely no rule about how much you can create, etc.
And will there be any investors who would be willing to take options and use some investment?
No, that again, that will be possible only at a later stage of a company's life. Investors will come in when the company is at least at the, just before the Series B stage or the, post the Series B stage. We've not seen being ready to buy options at a Series A stage or a seed stage of a company.
Okay. Thank you.
See, I remember the investor who's buying the options gets very illiquid shares. They have no rights. They have no information. They don't have any control over governance. Even if there's an exit, they may or may not get the exit. If it's an IPO, of course, it's fine. But if it's an M&A event, ultimately the company will control what happens. So it's unlikely investors will come in and show a lot of interest at an early stage.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Ashutosh, you'd like to ask you?
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
I wanted to know that if we, like for an early stage startup, if we hire someone at a CXO level, be it a CTO or be it whatever level, let's say. So the person, if let's say that person is getting an annual package of 15 lakhs per annum in an established company wherever he's working. So what should be like generally like how much ESOP we can offer and how much salary should be like propose in this sense?
Salary, of course, I don't have an answer at all. But options, if somebody is joining at the CTO level, a lot depends on his seniority or his or her seniority. If it's a young person, options can vary anywhere from 1 to 2-3%. But if it's a very senior person you're getting on board, especially if the salary is low, they'll ask for a huge chunk of options. It could be as much as 5, 10, 12%. It really depends on the seniority of the person and your negotiating leverage with that person.
Yeah, so that's why I said that let's say 15 lakhs per annum is their package in an established company. So they would expect some hike as well, right? So the idea of giving an ESOP is there, that we can't, let's say, we can't offer that person a salary of 30 lakhs per annum, like a 2x hike, or let's say 20 lakh, 25 lakh. So how much generally how it should be, like it should
For
be
somebody at that level, if you're getting a CTO, his current salary is about 15 lakhs. I would assume it's not somebody very senior.
Yes, definitely. Not very senior, yes. Someone with the experience of mid-level, like you can say 5 to 7 years, with 4 or 5 years.
I think about, anywhere from 1 to 3% would be reasonable.
Okay, 1 to 3%. And salary, then we should try and keep
because
the same.
Because you're getting him as a CXO.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sir, hi, Srikant this side. So, is there a border thin line to decide whether to offer equity, or maybe the percentage might be same? For an example, ESOP, if it is 1%, or if it is equity, then also it's 1%. Is a border thin line whether the founders can take a decision what need to be offered to the employee?
Sorry, Srikant, I didn't understand the question.
So my question is, sir, anyway, if you are offering a equity or ESOP, some percentage or number of shares from the ESOP pool, how to decide whether what to be given to the founding team or to an employee, or what is the right, whether to go with equity or whether to go with ESOP?
Oh, it really depends on, like I said, with founding team, because they're going to stay with you for the long haul, definitely worthwhile thinking whether you want to give them shares as opposed to options. But if it's definitely worth thinking about, I think there is no rule on this, but definitely worth thinking what is right. I can't say there is a, one size or one principle.
So what is the chances?
The factors to consider are, one, whether these people will stay if you don't give them shares. If they're super important for you and you're not able to convince them to stay, unless you give them shares, you should give them shares. If you don't think that is going to be a risk, then you can evaluate whether you want to give them shares or options. But really, it's about whether you think you can hold on to them or not at that stage.
Okay, so for an example, if I say what is more lucrative for the employee?
Definitely giving them shares.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So we're at 6:05. I think when if you have more questions, you could let us know, or we will ensure that your thoughts and questions are shared with Srini and RuleZero team. Just a final set of thoughts, really, because I do see Ashok mentioning about the platforms that help in buying and selling unlisted shares. So, do you see an opportunity in creating a secondary market for unlisted companies where investors can buy and sell shares? Is that a trend that you see?
Yeah, there are a lot of people thinking about it, including us.
And will that increase the investment pool among startups because there is an exit option?
See, this is not going to create an exit option. This is more a liquidity window for employees. So the companies don't face the pressure of having to see today. One thing is to say the company is gating this liquidity, right? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is the company is putting pressure on itself to be the only person who will offer liquidity. That is not a good place for the company to be in, especially when, times are not very good. So we believe there will be those kind of marketplace that will get set up. There are quite a few in the US. Forge Global, for instance, does a fair amount of work there, and they're a very valuable company. India will see that definitely it's going to happen. There's no doubt.
Great. And I think the audience and members can write to you, right, in case of any queries,
yes,
questions.
please, of course.
Sure. Okay. We'll keep it open for a minute or so. Otherwise, we'll conclude. And I think today is also Friday, and it's a holy festival. I see many of them. Thanks. Glad you found it useful, Radhika. And we'll make sure that we have more such sessions month-on-month, and hopefully very soon an offline closed-door engagement session. Yeah. Thank you again. Thanks, Srini, for your valuable time and your candid insights. We will.
If anybody has questions, like I said, please feel free to write, and we will answer all of them.
No, we'll do it. I'm just sharing your email address in the chat window, and yeah, you can feel free to write to him. And, great. Have a nice Friday and a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.